Hi, everyone. We're going to give some time for people to join and then we will get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for today's LFY webinar entitled AI Runs on Open Source and Real Humans, Why You Need Linux and Cloud Native Skills to Power AI at Scale. I'm Candice LeBlanc of the Linux Foundation, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. A few housekeeping items before we get started. During this webinar, all attendees will be muted. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to drop your questions in there, and we will get to as many as we can throughout the presentation. This is an official webinar of the Linux Foundation and therefore is subject to our code of conduct. Please do not add anything to the Q&A or ask questions that would be in violation of that code. Basically, please be respectful of all your fellow participants and presenters. Also, please note today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the Linux Foundation's YouTube page. With that, I will hand it over to Tim Sarowitz to kick off today's presentation.
Hi there. Welcome. I'm Tim Sarowitz, VP of Education for the Linux Foundation, and today we're going to talk about AI. The webinar title is AI Runs on Open Source and Real Humans, Why You Need Linux and Cloud Native Skills to Power AI at Scale. AI is a very hot topic, and I'm joined by two people today, both Clyde Seepersad and Christophe Sauthier. So, Clyde, would you give us a 30-second intro on who you are?
Oh boy, 30 seconds. Timer starts now. I head up the education program at the Linux Foundation, which essentially requires me to try to desperately keep up with all the fantastic open source projects that are coming in, many of which are pre-existing. So, for example, I'm sure we'll be talking in this conversation about MCP. But our role is to make sure that people, A, know what the technologies are that are being developed in a shared way, and B, figure out what is it and why should I care? And if you do care, how do we get you upskilled in a easier way than read the docs?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Sounds good. And Christophe, how about you?
Sure. Happy to be here, first of all. I'm Christophe Sauthier. I am the training and certification lead for the CNCF. And as part of that, I have the chance to run the Kubernetes program that I'm sure many of you have heard of, which is all about recognition of humans and based on that knowledge. So I think this is something that will be quite interested here too.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, as I mentioned before, AI is a massively big topic right now. You really can't do anything without that. As a result, many people are wondering, what does my career path look like? What is it going to be today? What is it going to be tomorrow? How do I plan for it? Of course, working for the Linux Foundation, an open source enthusiast, I think that's going to be central to it. But I'd like to hear from you what you think are those skills that will be this long-term career. What will be relevant for the long term in Linux, cloud native, the platform, and AI? Clyde, you had mentioned already working and really invest in this space. What are your thoughts are going to be some of the longer term tools?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be, not only is it not going to be your granddad's career, it's not going to be your dad's career, and it's not going to be even your older sibling's career because the ground is shifting underfoot pretty quickly. And I think the younger generation get this, right? That the idea that you pick a thing to build your career track on is no longer really particularly viable. Instead, it's really about saying, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? What are the opportunities ahead of you? And can you be someone who continuously learns and adapts? And part of that is just figuring out how all these tools that are coming at us fit in. Like, what does it mean for you, and how are you going to then use that and implement it in your personal life? How are you going to use and implement that, in your professional career? So the uh, adaptability has just become so much more important, right? It's like the days of saying, I'm going to be a DB admin and we're going to ride that for 30 years To be honest, that's probably not been true for some time already, right? But it's certainly not true now. And so, it is very discomforting because we have to let go of all these playbooks that we sort of grew up around. I think for this panel, we're a little older, so we certainly grew up around it. But embrace the new, right? And embrace the idea of continuous learning and adoption and experimentation. And be focused much more on, are we accomplishing everything that we can accomplish to deliver our mission, whether that's personal or whether that is professional, and less about what the job title says, right? We don't, I couldn't sit here and tell you 3 years from now, what the top job title is going to be. What I can tell you is the people who are broadly skilled and are continuously adding to their skills repertoire are going to be the ones who are super successful.
That makes sense. Absolutely. Christophe, you mentioned that you're deep into CNCF and all things cloud. Do you think that that's going to be different in your space? Kubernetes has taken over the world. Is it falling prey to the same joy and victory, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Kubernetes is here for a very long time. That I'm more than confident about that. Um, I do believe, and that's something that is commonly, as a spread among us, is that Kubernetes is a kind of new operating system now. So everything runs on top of Kubernetes. So that's for sure, from my point of view. The usage that we will have on top of that will evolve. That's also something I'm quite sure. And what we will run on top of Kubernetes is something that will be another topic. And that is a thing that needs to be invented and that needs to be defined. But the concept and the underlying bricks, Kubernetes and the things which are below Kubernetes are just here. If we would have such a conversation 20 years ago, we would have discussed about the LAMP stack. And we will have said, okay, Linux and all these things on top of that. Yes, that's true. And today, many of the applications that we are all running still rely on that. But Linux is here. It's just that we just shifted something here between Linux and Apache or the web server. It's just that we just added Kubernetes between the two of them. And that's something that will remain here for a very long time. But on top of Kubernetes, will it still be Apache? Don't think so. Yes, it will run for many things, for many, many servers, that's for sure. But we will have some other stuff here. And that's the thing that we still have to discover over the next decades.
Okay, which makes sense. I think the park stack is looking pretty attractive to me. But now might be a good time for our first poll question. So we have a poll question that kind of feeds into this part of the conversation. Just popped up, so I'll read it out for everybody. The question is, which best describes where you are today in relation to AI, Linux, and cloud native skills? Some of your options are actively upskilling or cross-skilling, have some exposure but not hands-on, aware of the importance, unsure where to start, supporting these teams but not building directly, and already working in these areas. So as we give people a minute to respond to that, I'll ask about that park stack that you mentioned that we're going to have a stack, like LAMP stack. It's the new one. Either one of you, what do you think Park will be the default open source stack, or do you think there's a contender out there?
Well, I might take this one, Tim. And I think we're going to post in the chat a link to the article I like to refer people to by Ben Lorica, which is a very old article because it's back from November of 2025, which, at the current pace feels like it was forever ago. And what Ben posits in there, and just for folks who aren't familiar, the Park stack is basically saying, what is the overall architecture of this brave new world? And the P is for Python, PyTorch, sorry, because that's how all the models are getting trained now, right? Is you have to put all that raw data and do the training. So the training piece, the P is PyTorch. The A is the agentic models and all the stuff that we're all frantically playing around with in our spare time and our not so spare time. The R is Ray, which is, Ray is to AI GPU workloads, sort of as Kubernetes is to CPU workloads. So they still need to orchestrate. And then the K is Kubernetes plus Linux plus all the things that we've been on this cloud native journey on together. Uh, and it's just a way to make sense of this blizzard of stuff that's coming at us, right? It's really hard when you're trying to ingest the amount of tech that's coming and all the various improvements in models and agent interconnectivity and what does, reinforcement learning look back with human feedback in the loop. So be able to pull up, and Christophe mentioned, back in the 90s, the idea of a LAMP stack just gave us like a mental model to think about in terms of like writ large, what's the architecture? LAMP was just a component, right? And then many, many things built on top of that. And I think POC is a great way to think about where we are now, which is it's fundamentally a combination of the CPU driven world that we've all been kind of heavily investing in for the past decade and the GPU driven world, which is where a lot of these heavy workloads and inference workloads run. And that makes sense because GPUs have their own capabilities. And Ben Lorica in his article does a nice job of pointing out that, the answer is both and, right? We have to figure out how to merge those worlds together. And I think the good news for many of the folks who are on this call is, A, you're interested because you've showed up to this webinar. B, you probably already are sort of some good part of the way down your kind of cloud native journey. And that's a great starting point, right? You've got one of the two pillars. I think we're all collectively figuring out the sort of GPU side of the equation. But part of what I think has gotten lost in the initial uh, enthusiasm is all GPU all the time. And the reality is a huge amount of these loads still run on the CPU piece. And so as fascinating as it is to think about what's happening at the inference layer, the reality is sort of just it's a combination, right? And so those skills that people have been building up on the CPU side of the ledger are going to be very important as we all collectively learn the GPU side of the ledger.
That makes sense. We can see the poll results and see
Yeah,
if
let's see.
anybody's
I'm
had a chance to.
curious.
We see that actively upskilling or cross-selling is the majority. That makes sense. Looks like a little less than half of the folks are there. Have some exposure. Kind of like what I thought. The not hands up. I thought there'd be more people with hands on. Aware of importance is the same as some exposure, and then it looks like supporting and already working in these areas are down with about a quarter or so. So I thought honestly AI was going to be a little bigger in this community just because it's everywhere all the time. But this is why we do these poll questions to see where people are coming from. We've mentioned that stack. So why? I guess the next question is we've talked about the Park stack. What is it? Why should it matter? If that's the what we're working with, then as AI is stepping in and automating some of these layers, what do we have to really know about our full stack? If everything's going to be on somebody else's provider, do I need to know Linux? Do I need to know the underlying technologies of Kubernetes if I'm just using an assistant, a clawbot, or something on top? So whichever one, I think Clyde, you went last. Christophe, you want to handle this one?
Go for it,
Sure,
Christoph.
happy to. Um, Actually, there is another acronym that I like here. PARC is amazing to explain what we are running and how we are running stuff. But for the underlying infrastructure, I really like another acronym, which is Kplay. Because Kplay is just, when my kids, they used to play with this small wood stuff, those small wood bricks, which are Kplay, at least in France. And everything is running with Kubernetes. When you're dealing with, I won't say everything, but when you're dealing with AI today, you will run with Kubernetes, Linux, PyTorch, and the AI models, Kplay, Kubernetes, PyTorch, Linux. And so that's why I think it's more than relevant. And those are the bricks that are running all the tools that we are using on a daily basis. When you think about AI, you have in mind all those big brands, all those big entities, and they're all running that. They're all relying on Kubernetes. They're all relying on Linux. They're all relying on PyTorch, and they're all relying on building some models to do that. And they're even using models to create their own models. They are training their models, but they're not starting from scratch because they're training their models based out of something. So this is more than relevant, that's for sure. It will continue to be that, and that is what enables us to have the Park stack that Clyde just mentioned. And if you want to be serious about that, because not everyone is using those models. Sometimes you will need to create your own model because you have your own needs. I'm sure all the big entities that we have around us aim to do some models that will cover everything. They will have some specialized model, but we all know that some companies around the world are creating their own models for a specific need, medicine, for sport analysis, for whatever you want. And you need to be able to manage and to own your training. You need the training of your model and the execution of your model. So if you want to do that, you will need to be able to understand and to understand and to have a deep knowledge on those elements. You will need to have a deep understanding of Kubernetes. You will need to then at some point on Linux, because that's cool. You will need to run some Python scripts. On which system do you run your Python scripts? I doubt it will be on Windows. So because PyTorch you have that as the name explains, it's based on Python. So you will need to run that on Linux, and that's it. So no, those topics and those skills are needed more than ever. More than ever.
It makes sense in order to, if you're I always think food and it shows, but in order to be a chef, you might not be out cutting vegetables as part of that meal, but you really have to know how to cut vegetables because there's going to be that one dish you have to go do it. So you might be plating elegant meals, but if you don't know how to wash dishes and cut vegetables, you're really not going to maintain that skill in the long term. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now is that just a cloud perspective, or do you think that this is going to be across all industries?
Oh, um, you can go ahead, Clyde, but I think it's clearly across all the industry, across the whole industry.
Okay.
I think everybody's finding this out, right? I mean, obviously, I think if you're paying attention to the news, you know that the pharmaceutical companies have been going hard at this since before even the GPT models came out, because there's huge value for them in the drug discovery pipeline being more efficient. And I think that speaks to what Christophe was saying, and it speaks to what the poll results said. A third of people are saying, 38% that they're upskilling. We've got to go experiment in this new frontier, right, and figure out like, hey, is my use case one where a small language model is more important because maybe I'm running a bunch of edge applications and I can't have a massive high throughput model with billions of tokens for that use case, which is not unlike Linux and embedded Linux. There's a lot of patterns, right, that I think folks who've been around can relate to and reference, but there's just no substitute for trying. I think it's incumbent on all of us to go at a minimum, if you don't, and I did the, common thing of misspeaking with PyTorch and Python, but Python's kind of the coin of the realm. Like, definitely go learn that and definitely go try some models, use some old data sets and get used to it. Try, setting up some inference cycles, try putting gates around the foundational models, right? So use the context windows to sort of narrow them in and supplement, which is what the RAG stuff is about, right? Supplement a general model. Like, just pick a place, right? It's kind of like what we used to tell people when they were coming in as open source developers, which is your first contribution does not have to be the Linux kernel. Like, pick a thing, like submit a bug fix, right? Just begin to get involved and begin to get involved across the stack, right? Because I think what we're learning about the sort of new world is there's not going to be a lane for, grand high poobah of PyTorch model building, right? We have to cross skill, and have breadth. Which is different because we went through a 50-year cycle where the premium started to be more on specialization and depth. And what the foundational models are good at is synthesizing all that depth of information, right? And so I think the human advantage now is maybe shifted to more of the synthesis across the functions. And that's why you see, I was reading something yesterday about, the Anthropic guys have, I don't know, several hundred job recs open, even while they're bragging that Claude writes all Claude's code. And they asked one of the senior execs, and he's like, well, somebody has to tell the Claudes what to write. Somebody has to define what the problems are we're trying to solve. And I think that speaks eloquently to what's different about how careers look going forward is the premium is on can you identify and solve problems in your organization using the technologies in the right way. And it's this blend of the CPU workloads, the GPU workloads, figuring out what the security elements look like, figuring out what the scalability elements look like, thinking about the privacy, thinking about where do we collaborate versus not. And the only way to do that is to get comfortable. And the only way to get comfortable is to go dabble. I think this is the open source community has always been a community of people who are willing to experiment. And I think that's going to serve you well. In fact, it's going to be the only thing that serves you well is your ability to experiment, learn, iterate, try some of the stuff, get a first-hand kind of feel for, how does it actually work?
How do we encourage people in that direction? I talk about AI and I'm out there in the world a little bit, and I hear people talking about particular roles. And they're talking about AI for this role, and they're focusing, they're really being narrow. What you're talking about really is kind of a cross-functional fluency. So what does that role play? Is it AI as a tool set that I'm really focused on, or is it what AI is doing is the tool set? And how, what does it look like? Is it a pyramid where I need a very strong layer and I build up, or more like a diamond where a little bit of knowledge about the core, a lot of knowledge about the middleware and tooling, and then knowledge again about the job that I'm trying to complete, or do my career. So I don't know what I'd like to know actually both of your takes on that since you have some slightly different backgrounds. So Christophe, what's your thought on that? Should we be focusing on the single career or the tooling that allows us to do anything for that cross functionality?
I don't think we should be. That's my opinion. But I don't think we should be focusing on the tooling. I think focusing on the business logic is more important, and the thing you want to achieve, and the architecture you want to describe, and the problem we want to solve. And the tooling is not relevant. I mean, we've seen. Okay, right now, when you want to do some coding using AI, by instance, you can just switch from one tool to another, switch from one model to another, and that doesn't change a lot. Yes, you will have different capabilities because of the models might be better at doing some plannings and the execution and stuff like that, but you will interact as a human with the model in the same way. So you can have some preferences, you can have some, but that's all. But the thing that you need to keep in mind is what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it. And you need to keep in mind, you need to have the knowledge of what to do, because otherwise you won't be able to tell the model what to do. I really like the parallel you did with cooking earlier. When you're a chef, you are not a chef right now is not doing anything, is overseeing everything, and is sometimes sometimes it's just you know whipping out the whipping out the plate because there is a trace here. I don't want to have that here. That's all. He will oversee what the others are doing, but he knows how to do all the stuff, and he will be able to guide them. And that's how I see AI today. That it's an enabler to go faster. It's an enabler to sometimes do stuff that you're not very comfortable with, but at least you need to have the ID. You need to have this knowledge. If you don't, it will be a mess.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this is not wholly unfamiliar, right? So for all of those who lived through the DevOps and DevSecOps revolution, you know, you used to be able to have your blinders on, right? I'm the dev guy, I'm the QA gal, I'm the production specialist. And we know those walls crumbled over the past 10 years. And this is more or less a continuation of that trajectory, right? You have to get a better understanding. And I guess since we're doing food analogies, it's more like a fork than an ice pick, right? You have to have some spikes, right? Some areas where you're particularly good. I think most people who are mid-career have those spiky areas where they're good, but you have to go build some new prongs, right? Get really familiar with some of the other pieces because to Christophe's point, if you're the chef and let's mix metaphors here, if you're the Linux chef and you're running 12 Al's Fine Foods Emporium, all the models which are trained historically for the most part, are going to see all the data patterns as, oh, this is a thing we write in C++. plus plus. And so then every time you ask it to do something, it's going to try to default to writing C. And so when people start saying, but Rust and memory safe, if you don't specify, but write this one in Rust, you're probably going to get the default model. And if you don't know to Rust is the better memory safe model, you're just going to see great code in C that works. And you're going to be like, great, the machine did its job. It passed all the unit tests. It passed all the production tests. But that's where the judgment matters, right? And so the only way to get judgment is to have exposure and to go experiment and try and learn some of that and embed yourself in a group of practitioners because the models are only good as the data it's trained on. And what we know is we're in a high flux time where new technologies are coming out, new concerns are coming out. We haven't really yet had our full first scale kind of pie in the face AI meltdowns where people, get trotted out to, those nice little Wall Street Journal profiles that they put on. And when that happens, which is inevitable, there's going to be a round of, oh, have we thought enough about privacy, about safety, about where our data is coming from, or where our data is going to? And the, you know, it, the old world was, you start as, I forget the word for the person who preps the vegetables, and then you work your way up, and then you're a
Yeah.
sous chef and you're a master chef. And like it or not, we're all being pushed up the food chain faster, right? And we're looking at our folks, even our fairly junior folks, and we're expecting them to be able to go figure out when should I tell the model to use Rust instead of C. And that is more responsibility. And so there's an acceleration that happens there. And then the responsibility on you as an individual is you can't just have these single spikes, right? Or these double spikes. You have to go try to embed yourself in some of these new technologies, get some of that first-hand experience. But most importantly, just be a relentless learner, right? Just keep scanning, finding out. There'll be many things where you look at and you quickly figure out, now that I understand what that is, it turns out I don't care. I can flush that from memory and sort of move on to the next thing. But it's actually pretty important to know what are the things not to care about as what are the things to care about. And that's the piece where the synthesis, the integrative knowledge is going to really be what drives careers because Christophe said it, right? We're in the business of solving problems, right? We're in business of unlocking value. We're in the business of improving efficiency, both personally and professionally. And so that should be the lens we're bringing to this, right? Is, hey, what's the right way to solve this problem? Which are the right tool sets to solve this problem? What does the cost structure look like? Because I do think we had in 2025 a free reign where everything was a GPU load all the time and just say, put everything in the model. And now we got the bills on how many tokens we consumed, and we're like, that was actually kind of expensive. And so I think there's a little bit more recognition now that, wow, it's not just the tech, it's also the cost because, the CPU stack stuff is 5 to 10% of the cost of trying to run it on a GPU stack. So not just am I getting the right business result, am I also getting the right financial result? And am I being prudent in terms of what the cost of these resources are? Because the GPU costs, as we all know, are astronomically high. And, there's just the way you learn is by doing. It's like, after your first giant GPU build, you're properly chastened that you're probably not going to do that again.
No, absolutely. And this is probably a good time to talk about the second. I'll get right back to you, Christoph.
I,
This,
I just I
yeah,
just wanted to add just one quick thing to what Clyde said about when you mentioned C and Rust and everything. I do believe that if you want to be efficient with AI today, you need to know what you want to achieve. because the AI has learned from so many, the AI model that we are using has learned from so many places and so many possibilities that they are not able to pick whatever suits you. They will pick something that might work, but not the best for you. I will give you just one fact. I'm doing on my own from just for my pleasure some coding, some vibe coding, and I have an app that I'm doing which is about analyzing images. Oh, a few weeks ago, the AI I was using did a great job. It was working. It was analyzing one frame. Oh, sorry, it was 2 frames per second. Okay, it's not that good, but I knew it wasn't using the right thing. I knew I wanted to use this particular library, which will help me save a lot of time, and that will improve the efficiency of the treatment by a lot. So after I got this first result, I tell the AI, no, it's not the best. It's not the best result I can get. I want to use that. Oh, and the AI starts to say, oh, I'm not really sure. I said, no, no, I'm not here to discuss about that. Do that. And I went from 2 frames per second to 45
Wow.
Wow.
just by switching the library I wanted to use.
Yeah. No, yeah,
So
it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah.
so that's why I just want to say, yeah, you need when you want to use AI, you need to know what you want to do. So the learning and the skills of the underlying elements are needed more than ever. And yes, I've been able to know that because I've experimented by myself, because I've been able to read and to search by myself. So we're fully aligned. Sorry, I just wanted to mention that.
No, no, no. It's a great point. It actually leads really well into our next poll question. So good setup. Thanks, Christophe. So if we can pop up our next one here, we can see the question. I'll read it just real quick. What is the biggest question you have about building a more future-ready skill set? Well, we all want to have and keep our jobs. So this is the questions that you have: is which skills are actually matter long term? How much breadth versus depth do I need? How Linux and cloud native connect to AI careers, how to move beyond theory to real world experience. And the final part is how to stand out without being an AI specialist. So we'll give people 30 seconds or so to do that. While they're doing that, we had a question come in. You mentioned K-Play. What's the acronym again for K-Play, Christoph?
Kubernetes, PyTorch, Linux, and AI models.
Okay, so AY is AI models.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, cool. Because I didn't catch this and went by, and it sounded cool. Like I like the park and the play and so forth. Um, So people probably had a chance to click on that poll by now, so maybe we can see the results and see if we are surprised by it or if it's what we expected. So from what people looks like, the majority looks like which skills will actually matter long term. So we all want to keep our jobs. And then the next highest appears to be how to move beyond theory to real world experience. So, how about one of you handles one, the other handles the other part of that? So, which one of you would like to tackle the which skills? I think you kind of already started this, but which skills will actually matter long term? And then the other can say, how do I move beyond theory?
Yeah, I might tackle the first one. I mean, we talked about it, and this is why the frameworks are helpful, right? Because it gives you kind of a reference point for how to think about the different component pieces, right? There's your classic CPU stack, there's your model training piece, there's your model sort of refinement piece, and then there's the actual inference, right? Which is where the GPU sort of value comes from. I think it's pretty safe to say that we have a pretty good idea that this is what the architecture going forward is going to look like, at least until quantum comes, and then we have to, sort of shake the magic 8 ball one more time. So I think we're far enough in to have a pretty good sense. That's what the big picture. Those are the components that are going to be at play. And so then it becomes a question of doing your self inventory. Okay, where do I have depth? Where do I not yet have depth? And how do I go about getting the additional depth that I don't yet have? Which I think I'll toss to you, Christoph. I think maybe that's the second part of the question, which is okay. How does one acquire said skills?
Actually, that's something that we are asked very often. That there is something that I really love. Okay, I'm just doing some kind of digression here. Um, when you're attending KubeCon, there is a talk, let's say a session that I really loved all the time, which is called the peer mentoring. So basically, you go to this big room and you just sit to a table which has one topic, and you have someone which has some knowledge, which will discuss with you about that topic. So it is done in group, and I really love that. I'm doing that every KubeCon I'm attending, and I'm usually a peer about certification and training and things like that. And that's a question I have every time. And the answer I'm giving is experiment, experiment, experiment. And yes, you don't need to have a real project to build something. You can have your own pet project. You can okay, just take your laptop, launch a Kubernetes thing here, a Kubernetes cluster here, using kind or whatever you want, and that's it. And just decide to have your own photo album of your cat. And that's the first step. And build it. And then so decide something that you want to do and then build it. But really, and if you want to try to do that and to start doing that using AI, that's fine. That's fine. You will get some elements. But if you decide to have some help from AI, you need to be able to get a real understanding of what you've done and what the AI has done. So ask the AI, what is the architecture? What are the various layers that have been done here? And basically get yourself the understanding and the knowledge of the various components that have been involved here. And maybe after that, decide to have the perfect album for your tree next to your place. And you know what? If you have something like that, just decide to expose it over the internet. You have the chance that all the cloud providers are providing some free tier where you can run some infrastructure for free, and that will be always free. So it won't cost you anything at all, but experiment and try something. That's the only way to do. Because yes, I know some people will tell me, but this is something I'm not able to put on my resume. That is true. At some point, it is true. But, you know, I do believe a resume is not everything when you're looking for a job. Yes, the resume will help you get an interview. But at some point, I think that's also where certification are important. Because if you have a certification, I do believe it is what help you get an interview. But during the interview, if you have just done the certification, people will understand that. But if you have done the certification plus some other experiment on your own, people will understand it and will appreciate that because you will have demonstrated some willingness to do. You will, and some curiosity. And because you've been someone who was looking and actively trying to upskill. And that's why we're all looking for. So even in a job interview, you can explain what you've done on from your pet project because you've learned about that, because you've learned something about that. And I do believe that all the experience are good. So of
Makes
course,
sense.
yeah, no, that's it.
Okay. But that leads to a kind of two-part question. Because doing it, like you can illustrate you actually can do the job and getting there. And of course, we have some wonderful education to get you started with this journey. But how do I know where I'm at? So we have the two parts are how do I know if I'm at the right point? So I'm starting my career, I'm a senior dev, and the world is changing underneath me. How do I know if I'm doing enough to compete? And then if not, and I need more, how do I leverage open source tooling to, because that's what's most important, of course, to have that credibility in my career and to keep my job for however many years I want to maintain it.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that's a question that a lot of people are sitting bolt upright in bed at 2 a.m. yeah, worrying about. And one of the things that's really challenging about where we are right now is I'll overstate it a little bit, right, and say that, it's challenging because nobody knows, right? And so in the good old world, you could go to like a senior colleague, right, and have this sort of mentor relationship saying, hey, I'm trying to think about sort of, what's going to get me to the next place. We're in a much more uncertain time now. And so there isn't necessarily what I call the playbooks, right? Like, hey, I could look it up and see like, okay, this is what the next thing is and the next thing is. And so there's definitely more responsibility on the individual to think about, okay, you know, if you think about your portfolio of skills, where do you currently have spikes? And maybe you're really spiky on managing cloud native workloads and doing that cost effectively and efficiently and all the rest of it. And then where should I add spikes, right? So do I need to add more spikes in terms of like being able to stand up a model? Do I need to add some more spikes in terms of being able to set good context boundaries around an existing foundational model to make it really sort of hone? Do I want to set, really good spikes in terms of thinking about the cost structure of let's not drop everything on GPU and then drive the bill kind of through the roof, right? And I think as you understand your business more, you can, spend more time thinking about what are the bottlenecks on value, where are we misallocating resources now, and use that as your guide. As Christophe says, like use the business, constraints and opportunities as your guide versus like a technical how-to manual, which if I go just sideways for a little bit for a pet peeve of mine, I really wish we wouldn't call it vibe coding because vibe coding, I don't know, it sounds like, you just sort of had a whim or, you had a hit of something nice and then you thought about doing this. I think, it's much more helpful to think of it as insight driven or intuition driven coding. What is it that I'm going to try to solve that hasn't been solved before? And now, instead of me sitting down, writing code, thinking about which libraries and which dependencies and kind of which patterns and fact, build patterns I want to use, I'm going to outsource that away. I'm going to let the AI do the assembly. Frankly, a lot of the code assembly is very similar to what humans were doing. Grab a library here, grab some code here, repurpose this thing here. And so that's not where the magic happens, right? The magic happens upstream in terms of so I would just I encourage people to think of it less as vibe coding as more and more as insight coding, right? Like the key thing is the insight. Like here's the place where we're not doing this particularly well today. Let's go think about how would we have to solve that. Maybe that means I have to go learn an unfamiliar part of it, right? To think about, hey, am I orchestrating these GPU workloads correctly and balancing between the training side and the inference side? But let that be your guide, right? Like find the opportunity, think about how you'd solve the opportunity, and then if there's a gap in your skills resume that kind of you see as a result of that, go attack it, right? Go figure out, is it VLLM because I need to parallelize the workload because it's really inefficient to put one query at a time into a GPU, which is built for multiple queries. And so VLLM takes it and says, okay, I'm going to give, instead of one query at a time, 50 queries, I'm going to put all 50 queries in simultaneously. And so as you learn those pieces, right, and you connect them back to real world experience, I think people are going to find that's the most efficient way to build skills is start with the insight, use the tools. Yeah, yeah. Christophe went from 2 to 45, right? It's a 20x improvement, right? And so that's how you learn and that's how you build that intuition.
That makes absolute sense. Christophe, did you have something to add to that?
No, I fully agree with Clyde, but I think the important thing here is being curious and do not fear what you don't know. And if you're curious, you will have an open mind to learn something new. And who knows, maybe that's something that you will absolutely love and you will be starting to be specialized on that. I mean, when we all started to work with Kubernetes, we went a path we have never done before. And so, and that's something we've been working now for a very long time. So we had an open mind at the time. And I think the key here is to continue to have that open mind over the years. And that's something that somebody told me, oh, how can you continue to be so interested in learning new stuff? But that's what makes everything great, right? Because otherwise we will be starting to do some stuff that at some point you will be bored. So let's have the open mind to continue to learn something new. And it doesn't mean you need to spend dozens of hours to learn something, but you at least discover something new. And you can just spend, 1, 2 hours to know the principle, and you will understand if it's something that might interest you or not.
That makes sense. I mean, absolutely makes sense.
I think I would just add to that, Christophe, that one of the great things about this new world is it's never been easier to go to your foundational model and say, explain Ray to me like I'm an eighth grader. Like, why would I use it? And you get a remarkably, I do this constantly, right? Things that used to take me days of trying to like pound through to get an understanding for, I can get up to speed much more quickly, conceptually by asking the models to sort of play back the collective wisdom of everything ever published on the topic. And so you have it's friend and foe, right? Like you can actually use the tool to help drive you up the learning curve in a way that it really is a Swiss Army knife, right? Some days it's the opener, some days it's the corkscrew. Like you really have to think of it as this sort of really multifaceted tooling where it both does, can do some of the work and help you learn some of the things we were talking about, like with Rust and C. Just it is, people always joke about the sort of hammer and nail fallacy, right? It's actually not a hammer. It is really it's a multi-tool. And part of our jobs is collectively figuring out how to use all these different aspects of these foundational models.
I would just add something because I think we skipped something in your question, Tim, which was how do I know where do I stand? And I think, people should be bold and go and ask others. Honestly, the community we are living in, because we discussed about the importance of open source tooling in this new approach, let's say. And yes, and so don't hesitate. And when you're meeting someone who has some knowledge, engage with that person. Because remember that person has also started at some point. And so everyone has started one day and everyone remembers that, or 99% of the person remembers that. So you will be
Well,
surprised. You will be
that's a great
surprised.
question, though. Where do you start? Where do we start? I think it's a very common question I get. Great. I know I
Yeah,
need to get here. Everything you guys said.
yeah.
Where do I start today if I'm brand new or my role has changed? Like, how do I get started? What's step one of this journey?
I, I
Yeah,
think,
go ahead, Christophe.
okay, I'm sorry, but I think we already answered some stuff here with the various stack we mentioned, with the Park or the Kplay. You need to have some Linux knowledge. You need to have some Kubernetes knowledge, and then build on top of that. That because when you said I'm brand new, okay, do you have some Linux knowledge? Yes or no? If you don't, you should start with that. You should start with that. And on top of that, now you have some Linux knowledge. So you are comfortable with the basics. I won't ask you to be able to do a patch for the kernel, not at all. I won't ask you to recompile the kernel, not at all. That's something that might be interesting, but honestly, I don't think the last time I don't remember the last time I just built a kernel. It was 20 years ago, and maybe. And on top of that, okay, so now I might be interested to start to use Kubernetes, and because I understand on what it stands. And then once you have been able to use Kubernetes a bit to deploy one stuff and just an hello world application, that's fine. And make sure that this application, that the hello world can be seen by everyone. Okay, now maybe you will try to deploy once. Kubernetes the hard way is something that is really, that teaches a lot. And I know you know that, Tim.
Yeah.
And and that teaches you a lot. And that doesn't mean you will do that all the time, but it will explain you just do that once. And once you've done that, go to the next one. Okay, now I know Kubernetes. So now I would just go to the AI which runs on top of that I want to run on top of that. Okay, so what will be the model what model I'll be running? Because I'll just start by running a model. And this model needs to be embedded within something, in application. Okay, so and then maybe, maybe I can try to do my own model. Oh, if you want to run your own model, maybe you will need to do some stuff around PyTorch. And it's something that you will start to work on that, and everything goes after that.
That makes sense.
Sorry, Clyde. I just interrupted you.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, the I mean, obviously, some of this depends on kind of what skill set you bring to the table already, right? So I don't know that there's a universal prescription. I would say there are some general principles, right? Like if you haven't experimented with building your own agent, please start today. Like that is one of the things that's just going to be incredibly important in any of the multiverse features that we have. Like getting familiar with how to do that. It doesn't mean you have to run off and stand up your own MCP server today, right? Like go to Hugging Face, grab one of the existing ones, and start experimenting because we know that that piece is significant because really agents are the first time. It's a novel piece for us because up until now everything was a tool. And then agents are different because agents can use tools. And that was never a thing before, right? So this is like conceptually a very different place to be, right? Because before it was like, well, the tools, and I tell the tools, and I choose these six, and this is what my DevOps pipelines look like. Now the agent is using some amount of agency to decide which of the tools should I put into that pipeline. And that's a very different place. So definitely I think it'll force you to learn a whole lot of stuff downstream from that about how these stacks work together. If you start, and it's like the kid on an analogy, right? Don't try to solve the world on the first go. Like pick something very discrete, manageable, and start playing with it. Because I think the agents are a great gateway to get to kind of back you into what the full stack is and how they all interoperate. And then the more you do that, the better. I had a great quote last week. Somebody was talking about talent and how do I think about talent. And, it used to be the resume. And then there was this sort of like, well, repos are the new resume. Show me your repo. And this guy was like, no, 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 I don't want to see a repo. I want to see your context mid-file. Show me your markdown context summary of what you've been doing. And that'll give me all kinds of insight into how you're interacting with the model, how you're thinking about constraining it, expanding it, kind of what your use is. And I thought it was interesting, right? Because it's sort of like, it does feel like we've moved on from uh, show me the code as the primary thing to show me how you think about the code, which is inherently what, if you dump your context into a markdown file, that's inherently what you're seeing, right? It's like a peek into how your mind operates. And I think he was onto something, right? Because it's onto this idea of like, show me how your brain works on agents. Like what do you ask? What do you correct? What do you not correct? And so I just thought it was an interesting lens to help us think about, how where the value has moved to, right? Because if you're dumping your sort of context session into Markdown file, what you're doing is exposing your thought process, right? Which questions did I ask? How did I frame it? Which conditions did I set? How did I try to put more context to limit the model so it's looking at specific areas. And so I think that's a good way to think about it is, start your agentic journey. It'll teach you all kinds of things. And then every now and again, pull your own context file and look at it and reflect on it, right? It's like, why did I do that? Why did I not ask this? Because I think that'll be this is my vibe coding thing. It's not vibe coding, it's inside coding. Like, figure out how do you keep making your thought process better, cleaner, more efficient. How do you use these tools? And I think that reflection, at least yet, that's this is the AGI thing, right? Like the machines aren't there yet, right? They're the thinking mode is thinking mode, but it's not really thinking mode because it's not really truly, another great quote I heard recently is that humans are uniquely good at omnidirectional inferencing. Models are good at unidirectional inferencing, right? You take all the stuff and you measure all the matrix factors, and this is the biggest one, so you're going to go there. What we're good at as humans is integrating all that context and doing this omnidirectional inferencing, right? Of like, ooh, this thing I heard is actually relevant, I'm going to pull it in. But pick a place to start. I would say start with the agent because that'll be your gateway. It'll lead you into all kinds of strange and unexpected places, but it's a good way to put yourself on that glide path.
Okay, that is
And
great.
if you want a starting point here, just to add to what Clyde said, um, there is a project which is under the Linux Foundation umbrella now called Goose, and which is about agents. And they had an advent calendar in December, which was helping you to discover a bit more of that every day. And I really like this kind of thing where you have to do something one day and then another thing the next day. And of course, December is over now, but you can still access it. At least when I look at that a few weeks ago again, it was still accessible, and it was helping you to understand how it works. So that could be a good starting point.
Yep, love it. Yeah, Goose came in alongside MCP, right, into the
Yeah, yeah,
Agentic AI Foundation. And we
yeah.
haven't talked about it a lot, but if anybody goes back and feeds this webinar into their AI, what you hear is almost every tool we talked about was open source. Goose, MCP, Linux, Kubernetes, Python, PyTorch, VLLM. Uh, it's the way people work now, right? Like nobody wants to go back to the old proprietary jail. And even things that start off in labs like MCP and Goose and Ray, they're ending up in the open because that's how we collectively get comfortable with these technologies, right? Is things that we can break down and look at the source code. So I almost don't even say open source anymore because I feel like by default, everything become if it's good, it becomes open because if it's not open, people walk away from it. But they and I'm looking at the clock. I know we're close to getting out of time here, so I know Tim's going to start pulling us off by the cane here soon. But Tim, any last place you want to take us?
Yeah, we have like 3 minutes left. We had some great questions. I'll try to summarize a lot of them with the roles are changing. Are we going to be all DevOps? And then what are the ripple effects to other places, not just IT, but automotive, like logging, like all of these other industries? We're like real quick in a minute or so, if you could say, what is our role probably going forward? Is there a silo? And then what are the ripple effects to non-hardcore IT areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the hardcore IT stuff has been never shy about jumping on, figuring out wave after wave after wave of how do we get, into cloud and cloud native and FinOps as a practice and cloud, edge applications. What's different now, and especially with agents being users of tools, is you start seeing, I had a CFO a few weeks ago want to show me his vibe coding weekend project, which was mildly terrifying. The amount of safeguards he overruled to get the thing running. But it's true, right? I think what's happening is as these tools become more accessible to the layperson, more people are going to start doing it, and they're going to need a Sherpa, right? We've heard a lot about these field deployed, forward deployed engineers. I think that's a first intuition that somebody needs to guide the non-tech people as they start like playing in the space. They're gonna need, I want to say a grown-up. They're gonna need a somebody coaching them, guiding them. Do this, don't do that. Be careful about this. Ooh, it's asking you for a whole bunch of permissions to be set to open, because that door has been opened wider, right? And so our comfortable little sort of, community of tech practitioners. I think the door's been kicked down and CFOs are now coding on weekends. So I think that's part of the role, right? Is we're going to have to engage much more with the business side people. And a lot of that is showing them the right way to do the tools, showing them the right way, because it does start to feel a lot more self-service, right? It's like I don't have to, I don't have to do a project request in to the tech desk anymore. I can just start trying to do it on my own. And that's gonna if the technical folks aren't providing better guidance and better tooling. I always think of the analogy of, we kind of got to a point of platform engineering as a way to sort of set boundaries at the enterprise level. What's platform engineering in the AI context? Because we kind of gave everybody permission last year and everybody just went and did whatever they felt like doing. And now it's like, okay, we gotta bring this thing in. And I think that's going to be a big part of the value of technical folks, right? Is kind of creating those boundary conditions to allow a broader set of audiences to get in there and solve business problems, but in the right way, in a cost-effective, scalable, robust, all those other questions that the business side folks aren't going to know, right? Because that's not what they're bringing. They're bringing I have a business problem I'm trying to solve, and I think it's our job as technologists to say, okay, let's solve that the right way.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, I've really appreciated spending the hour with you. I've learned a lot from this, and that's coming from somebody who already knows a fair amount. Thank you for your time today, both Clyde and Christophe.
I
Thanks
appreciate
a
the
lot.
opportunity. Thanks everybody for joining.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our speakers for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. As a quick reminder, this recording will be on the Linux Foundation's YouTube page later today. We hope you join us for future webinars. Have a wonderful day.